NBC in New York.
In New York, right.
In 1982,
Correct.
right? And do you remember the feeling of when you first arrived there?
Well, I thought the building was just iconic. I mean, I thought there's no better broadcast address than 30 Rock. I just thought it was unbelievable. I mean, you always saw from afar, you watched the Macy's parade as a kid, and you watched the tree lighting, and you just, wow, I'm at this address. So I thought, and on top of that, when I was in 4th grade, the age of 9, our school from Queens took a trip through the NBC studios. And I always had this thing in my mind about NBC. And I've always, actually, since 1970, I've worked at an NBC station except for 3 years. I worked at Channel 2 in New York. But other than those 3 years,
I do think NBC has some sort of, the brand of it has a mystique, especially if you grew up in New York. There's a something
I don't know.
about it.
I really don't know.
I have that with NBC.
Well, I used to have it, but I don't work there anymore. So I've kind of lost the love and feeling.
Of course.
But I mean, I thought there was something great. I mean, listen, I started there in the early 80s. Marv Albert started on Channel 4 in 1972. So between 1972 and 2009, it's 37 years. It was just Marv and me. That's more years than you've been alive.
What was it like taking over for Marv Albert, who at that time was already quite well known?
Well, I started filling in for him, and it was interesting because there were some people who thought I looked like him. So I thought maybe some people didn't realize.
Different color eyes.
Different eyes, yeah. And my hair's real. And I don't bite. So I say that with love, Marv. People would every so often say, hi, Marv. So my famous gag was to ignore them. So I'm at an airport once. I just got off a long flight, and I'm carrying my bags, and some guy comes up to me and says, hi, Marv, and I ignore him. How do you answer that? I mean, I'm not Marv. I don't feel like answering the guy. Comes back to me and says, Marv, I've been watching you my whole life, and I'm really offended that you didn't say hello to me. So I don't answer him again and walked away, and I figured this guy goes home and tells his wife what an asshole Marv Albert is. So I've told Marv that story. So I've even written the Bible.
You're out there helping his brand.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're at NBC, and you suddenly start the Spanning the
World
World series.
Tom Hanks calls it the caca thing. That was one of my career highlights. I went into Tom Hanks and he says, are you still doing that caca thing? I said, what the hell is he talking? At the beginning, there's a rooster that goes cock-a-doodle-doo. Tom Hanks, the caca thing. Just so you know. That's my name. That's my name-dropping moment of the day.
So you start that, and did you have any idea it would take on the life and the brand?
No, because I remember the night we edited the opening. It was in February of 1987, and we brought in the great Don Pardo to do the voice, and we had no idea how to end it. So we just said, Dopey, tune in next time, if there is a next time. Just as a joke. And we really, when we aired it the first time, I said, I don't know, listen, I mean, it was just kind of a goofy thing. And that next time took on a life of 22 years. So it's been kind of cool.
And the bloopers themselves, were those fun to call? You were like the curator of the bloopers.
Yeah, it was fun, but you put the pressure on yourself. In other words, for 20 years, I did it on a Today Show. And a classic story was I'd get through it. I do it on Channel 4, New York, then I go on a Today Show.
Monthly, you did it on the Today Show, right? Okay.
And I'd get done, and Katie Couric would look at me and say, when I was done, she'd say, slow month, huh, Len? On the air, naturally. But she liked it.
Teasing, right.
Yeah, but I mean, it was like, I'd break into a cold sweat, because you'd have to top yourself.
You had to do it all over again. Would you do the same thing?
Here's the one mistake I made in my life. I thought everyone was a sports fan. I thought everybody was.
But your wife wasn't a sports fan, so you must have known that wasn't true.
As a kid, growing up, I thought everyone was a sports fan. I have to tell you, and I make this argument, and I'm going to stick to it, the vast majority of people are not sports fans. Now, you're going to look at me like I'm crazy.
Yeah, it just seems possible.
They're just
louder than everyone else?
Yes, and the non-sports fans are intimidated by ESPN, by WFAN radio, by the back page of the Post, the Daily News. They think everyone's a sports fan because it all sounds like gobbledygook and everyone's talking sports. And it's just not true. I'll bet you of the 3 cameramen, one of them could care less about sports here today. There's one over there. He could care less about sports. And there are tons of closet non-sports fans out there, which is, to get serious for a moment, a lot of what I did on the late newscast when I used to do it was aimed at the non-sports fan, but I try to walk a line because a lot of the people watching a newscast are there to get the weather report or tuning in early for Jay Leno. Right. And I would walk a fine line, and how I did that was I would never just start a story by saying Tom Coughlin. I'd start the story by saying Giants coach Tom Coughlin. Now, that's a little subtlety, but for that guy, that cameraman over there who, number one, doesn't know Tom Coughlin or could care less about him, he also went to Syracuse, by the way, another guy who couldn't get into Cornell. That kind of set the stage. So I did it on a newscast, and that's what I'm doing with my daily emails.
Well, you've always been a storyteller.
Yes.
And
it's about stories.
And so that's probably what made you so successful at your job for so long.
I hope. I also had this theory about cliches. They would drive me nuts. in other words, I would hope that in my entire broadcasting career I never used a cliche. I never said, and I'll tell you where that emanated from. There was a great sportscaster who went to Syracuse, since passed away. He's the godfather of sportscasters for Marv Albert and myself and a lot of others, by the name of Marty Glickman. He was a Syracuse football player and track star in the 30s, went on to broadcasting. He was one of the first people to ever broadcast professional basketball. He made up some of the terminology of the college basketball, of pro basketball play-by-play, excuse me. Marty came and spoke to Syracuse when I was a student. I brought him up to speak to students. And he said if you walk into a professional locker room, you never hear a football player say, hey, look at me, I'm toting my pigskin to pay dirt. People don't talk that way. Well, sportscasters do.
Right.
People don't talk that way. He's carrying the ball. So I've never used pigskin in my life. I've never said toting. I've never said...
So you've tried to make it accessible for anyone, even if they're not an
English.
avid, crazy
Speak
sports
English.
Right.
That's all, just English. I never say goes yard. I don't know what the hell that means. I mean, it's a home run.
What was the feeling like when you were there as a part of it?
Well, you're just doing your job. I always viewed it as a job. I'd show up at 2, 3 in the afternoon, all I tried to ever do, and I said this repeatedly, was put on the best sports show I could. That's all I ever wanted to do. And when it was a very uninteresting sports day, I always blamed myself. The fact that no one made news was beside the point. I felt I should have put on an interesting broadcast.
Did you shorten your broadcast on those days?
No, I thought actually some of my best broadcasts were on days when absolutely nothing happened, because it forced you to be a little creative.
Right.
Force you to come up with an interesting angle, something offbeat, some other connection, some unusual highlight. On the days when every team and their uncle is playing in New York and you have to do Highlight City, then it all kind of just runs together. So it was more interesting on the days when there was nothing to talk about. What's interesting now is that I'm not doing the news on a nightly basis. I'm getting a lot of comments from people like, yours was the last voice I would hear before going to sleep at night. I said, well, now talk to your wife, for Christ's sake. Leave me alone. Talk to her.